So should get rock thing going also. That's what I need to see. Got that. No. And what I'm doing right now is I'm just waiting for the rock fin to show up so I can click us live over there. There we go. Cool.
Okay.
And so we are live on YouTube. And normally since I don't I like to do my interviews on this channel so that way it's a little bit easier to streamline it for people when they're looking for some of our content, so it's not because I do a lot of different types of content. But yeah, sorry about all that. And for everybody out there who was waiting, sorry about the delay. Had some stomach issues, so unfortunately I had to keep our guests waiting, and my apologies. But without further ado, we're here today for a conversation with Yonatan, and he is a journalist based out of Ethiopia. And so I wanted to have this conversation because there's a lot of issues that are going on right now, which I don't think are getting far. I don't think they're getting nearly enough attention on that are going on in that whole in the Horn region of Africa, the whole Ethiopia and Tigray, and there's just a lot of different things that I feel need to be getting more attention. So while Ukraine and Russia is getting, wall to wall coverage, we do need to know what the heck is going on in other parts of the world. And so uh Yonatan, can you I guess introduce yourself to the audience, and then kind of give us a little brief summary, I guess, to warm us up to what we're talking about and going into today.
Okay. I'm Yonatan. I live and work here in Addis, Ethiopia. I'm a journalist and I'm also a published author. Uh, Presently, the situation here in Ethiopia is calm, and especially in the central parts of the country in Addis Ababa, everything seems normal. But we heard news that things are not as peaceful as in the northern part of the country. And there are some news that currently that we are hearing that some troubles are occurring around Djibouti as well. So most of the countries in East Africa are facing problem,
Okay.
and that's the current situation that the East African nations are facing.
What do you say is leading to these problems? Is it all internal issues? Is it dealing with cultural issues? Is it outside influences? Because of course, in the West we hear different things and we have our different opinions on what we're getting at, but it can only be so. I guess we can only have so much of an opinion based on what we are, what we're fed through our media and through our journalists. And I'm curious to know like what you're seeing, because you're able to see it firsthand and you're able to interact with a lot more sources which are a lot more reliable. So I was just curious, like what would you say is like the real story of what's going on?
The major issue is foreign interference, I think, because East African nations, you see, they are all connected culturally speaking.
Hmm.
Ethiopia with Djibouti, with Eritrea, with Sudan, with Kenya, with Somalia. All these nations have peoples that are living in the border areas who speaks similar languages and have similar culture and similar religion. So the society is integrated. There is no problem among the society. But the only problem that I am seeing is foreign interference and the issue with terrorism. If you take, for instance, Somalia, there are terrorists there, and they have attacked the Ethiopian border most recently.
Mm-hmm.
and those terrorist groups are they get the aid, their weapon, their food, everything they get is from foreign countries, from the Arab nations, and they are extremists. So
Mm-hmm.
it's the same situation if you go northern to the northern parts of Ethiopia. The TPLF, the terrorist group, is funded by the World Food Program. It's gets its food, its fuel. It even trains its soldiers in UNHCR refugee camps.
Mm-hmm.
So when you add up these things, you can clearly see that all the terrorist groups operating within the East Africa, they get their help from foreign organizations. The people have no problem. We've been living together for centuries,
Mm-hmm.
but all these issues that we are facing are recent. And I think it has to do with the geopolitical location of the East Africa, especially if you take, for instance, Djibouti,
Mm-hmm.
Eritrea, and Sudan, and Somalia. They control the Red Sea, and it's a route for. Uh, you have seen that the pirates in the Indian Ocean with the Somali pirates.
Yeah.
So it's a trade route, and they don't want that. They want the major powers want to control that trade route, and in order to do that, they need political influence in Somalia, Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Eritrea,
Well,
and
that's some.
that is.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to ask, because
Mhm.
question I had real quick.
Yes.
I've heard that a lot of how the pirates situation was even created out of Somali with Somali pirates had a lot to do with the shipping lanes and the fact that a lot of the large commercial shipping lanes are are basically cutting off the natural food and resource supply of like fish and stuff like that to that region because I heard that that's one of the major way that people were fed in that area. And once those shipping lanes start coming through, a lot of Western powers, all from what I was hearing, I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong. That them coming through there is what led to the rise in piracy in the first place.
That's true. But the major issue is, especially these days, what we are facing is in the Somalia country. As you say, it's a major trade route, and it's about control and Western influence. And the East is also here, like the Somalis, the Chinese, the we have influence from the Arab nations. They all want to control that route. And in order to do that, they need political influence. And they are creating this, they're supporting warlords to put their puppet. For instance, in Ethiopia, they had this TPLF puppet that they were doing everything the Western wanted, including sabotaging the country's economy and social fabric. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the kind of situation that we are facing. That every power, every major power in the world, they are having their own support for the warlords, and they are creating this chaos in East Africa, especially in the Somali region. The Arabs are supporting the terrorist groups, and America they are supporting secessionist countries. They are not countries like Somaliland and so on, but
Mm-hmm.
they are regions which are ruled by different warlords, which are claiming to be a different nation, and this is creating a lot of problem for the country, for Somalia, for instance. And it's the same situation with Djibouti as well. For instance, in Djibouti, there are many countries who have military bases there. No one knows what they are doing. But as I said, it's a major trade route. So in order to gain control for that, they are helping their own forces there, and the people in there are suffering, especially in the Somalia country.
Yeah, so I mean, because I often hear people put the onus on the West, or they put that on China, and sometimes I hear even Russia have an influence. But often I don't hear people bring up the fact of the Arab countries which are in there. So it sounds like it's. I mean, I guess there's probably more influences than this, but it's almost like a
Yes.
three-way tug of war where the Eastern Horn, those countries, Somalia, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Tigray, all of these different factions and areas in here are all being pulled apart, like from basically most of the world's outside forces are major powers.
Yes. And the other thing is with Ethiopia, there is an Egyptian influence here. The
Mm-hmm.
Egypt have an interest in Ethiopia because of the Nile, and Ethiopia is building a dam on the river Nile, and that is causing a major problem for the Egyptians, and they want to destabilize Ethiopia and stop the construction of the dam, and that's another problem. The same
Mm-hmm.
issue is influencing Sudan, for instance. Sudan has had relatively peaceful was a relatively peaceful country, but now, and because of the Egyptian influence, they are having these uprisings, and
Oh, okay.
it's this
So
stability and that.
you contribute a portion of the blame of these uprisings directly to Egypt specifically.
Yes, especially in Sudan and Ethiopia.
Mm. Because we don't often especially like in the Western media, it's focused on that there is a problem, but nobody's getting to, okay, what are the nuts and bolts of this? How are this, you know, what's manufacturing this problem? What's keeping this problem persisting? What's making this problem worse? And who are the actors involved in this? And it's almost focused upon as if it's just two African nations fighting as Africa always does, and it's refreshing to actually hear actual players who are involved in some of this stuff, because I always make this statement. People can always complain about the crabs in a bucket, but nobody ever talks about who put the crabs in the bucket in the first place and who's stirring the pot of the crabs. And so, my rough analogy there is, these nations who are fighting are the crabs in this situation and being pushed on by other forces which are never talked about.
Exactly. I mean, if you see the funds that they are getting, these terrorist groups, you can clearly see who is influencing, who is running the show. Behind every terrorist in East Africa, you found Arab money, you found Western aid. Okay, that they are supporting terrorist groups in East Africa to destabilize these countries, and they are already under poverty line. And these countries are very poor countries. They are surviving with aid food, and I don't know why they are doing these things for these poor people. And I have no idea. And it's a sad situation. The people want peace. No people in the world wants to fight one another. And this is our socially and culturally and historically tied people we have in East Africa. They have strong social relations between every country in the region. However,
Oh,
the
sorry, go
rest
ahead.
of the world doesn't want the peace here.
Yeah, I mean, I do see that, and I can echo that sentiment that there are definitely reasons why a lot of nations benefit from there being turmoil and disharmony there. I was wondering, which are some of the Arab nations in particular that you would point out? I know you mentioned Egypt, but what are some of the other ones that you would say that are funding the terrorism specifically?
Uh, you have Iran and Saudi. They are
Mhm.
on opposite sides, and they support. One supports the terrorist groups in the Somali region, in the Somalia country, and the other are helping the government and other political parties and secession groups like Juba, and there's Somaliland, and those are not countries, but they are separate from Somalia, and supporting those governments by itself are unrecognized nation is fueling the conflicts in East Africa. And you can clearly see that the weapons they got, for instance, they have attacked Ethiopia in the past few years. And those people actually, we have seized weapons that come from uh, way far in the Afghan region and all the way from the Arab nation, Somalia, what is it, Iran. Iranian weapons are discovered. So you can clearly see that weapons are being shipped to the region from all over the world, from the Arab world, especially from Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Because I know normally if it's Saudi Arabia involved, then more than likely UAE is involved also, because they normally work hand in glove. Um, would you say that they would be on, like Saudi Arabia would be helping the government side, or helping or funding the terrorism side?
The Saudis are helping not the government but the secessionist groups you have
Well,
in Somaliland.
sorry, that's what I
Hmm?
meant. Secessionist group, because I know that that can be a misnomer saying a government, because you do have a faction of the government which is the born and raised citizens, the people of that nation who are fighting for, fighting for their nation and what they believe in, and trying to make sure their nation is prosperous. And then you do have um, government manipulation, corruption, and stuff, which always goes on in these situations, which is on the other side, counterbalancing that, which is often funded by foreign nations. The same which you see in many nations.
Yes, but here the Saudis are helping secessionist groups, not the government, not the democratically elected government of Somalia. They are supporting other groups. They call themselves the government of Somaliland, for instance, but Somaliland is not accepted as a nation, and it's a northern part of the Somalia, and there's a secessionist group there, and they are helping those groups, and that is dividing the country of Somalia.
So that would be almost similar to like what the U.S. was doing with Juan Guaido, how they were trying to, foster that coup attempt over Maduro.
Yes, similar.
Okay.
But here,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
but here you have warlords occupying a whole area, like a region of Somalia, and they are saying that this is a new nation, and they are getting funds from Saudi to keep separate from Somalia. And it's just one case. You also have other these kind of groups. For example, it's the same situation in Tigray. Tigray is part of Ethiopia, but the terrorist group claims that it's a separate nation, and they want to. Even their program is not real. They want secession, and then they attack and invade parts of Ethiopia and move to other regions of the country. So it's not really clear. So their motivation is simply to create chaos and to start war. And it seems they have no real goal. I mean the Al Shabaab in Somalia, for instance, they want to make Somalia this country to be ruled by Sharia law, and they want to establish a Muslim Brotherhood kind of nation in Somalia. But I don't know what they are doing in Ethiopia. They come and invade Ethiopia and moved several kilometers into the country. Their motive, their goal, we don't know what it is. All they need is to start war with Ethiopia and destabilize the country. And the country is already facing a war in the north, and now they want to start war in the east as well. So it seems like their only goal is to create chaos in the region.
Yeah, because I was trying to figure out exactly what's going on, because I do hear the difference between some people will make they will make a separation between Ethiopia and Tigray, and trying to figure out and then I'll hear other people who will live in that region and will say, no, we're all Ethiopia. That's not true. This is just a faction within the within this location which are trying to separate us. And since I would always hear like kind of like two different sides of the story, it got kind of hard to hear what exactly is going on there. And so that does make sense that you do have like that would be a portion. Would it be accurate to say that it has a heavier Muslim population and more influenced by the Arab nations?
Not Tigray. Tigray is mostly populated by Christians. There are minority Muslims living in Tigray,
Minority
and
Muslim.
it's yes, but the majority of the Tigray population is Christians. It is the core of the civilization and the country itself. Ethiopia is based in Tigray. It has long historic and social connections with Ethiopia. It's as if it has been the center of the country called Ethiopia, and now there is this. They were the ruling class of Ethiopia. You see, you understand that the Tigray region was ruling Ethiopia until for the past 30 years, until like 4 years ago. And after 4 years, there was a government change, and they didn't like that. And the group who was administrating the country moved to Tigray region, and they cut off that area. They hold siege to the people of Tigray, and they claim that it's an independent state. It has never been independent. It has always been part of Ethiopia. It has been the center of Ethiopia, and now all of a sudden, when they lose power, this terrorist group took the people hostage and claimed that that part of Ethiopia is a new country now, and they are getting support from the West, especially from EU and America. Now, the people in there, it's mostly a mountainous region, and it has a low food shortage, and that aid have been going to the region via via the World Food Program and the United Nations. They've been getting medicine, food, fuel. However, the people does not get any of this. All they do is they take the food and the fuel and the medicine and everything, use it for their terrorist group and for their terror act. However, the UN, the US, the EU, none of them blame them for this. So they are deliberately supporting the terrorist group. Unless you blame them outright and say that this is wrong, that they shouldn't do this, you are indirectly helping them. Now, they have a refugee camp in Sudan, and in that refugee camp, it's a UN camp, and the terrorist group is training soldiers there. The UN itself admitted that, but they didn't take any action against the terrorist group. So this is a clear indication that the West is directly helping this terrorist group to divide the nation.
I mean, it makes sense with what we see, what's going on with the rest of the world. I mean, last night, me and my co-host, which shout out to Chris Lawson out there. He's in the Rockfin side. We were talking about like basically how some of the proxy wars that have been going on with Russia, and this is similar. But I just think that it's the part of what the U.S. is doing, which is never often talked about. That the proxy wars and the coup attempts and all of the different things which they do to try to destabilize Africa is very rarely talked about. And like I remember this professor not that long ago. He came out, I think he's British, and he talked about how there has to be disharmony in Africa in order for the Western powers themselves. Now, he's speaking specifically for the Western powers, but I'm sure these other, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's the Arab states, they all have their particular reasons, which I wouldn't doubt that they're all basically similar. That Africa sits on, a great amount of internal wealth, minerals, and things like that. And if there was able to work out some kind of harmony with the African Union, that it could start to threaten the other global powers in a sense. What do you think? Am I off base with that, or no? something
It's
that
obvious. It's obvious. You know that Africa has natural resources. Ethiopia, for instance, has many natural resources, like the River Nile is it's a source of Nile, and we are the one of the world's best coffee producers. And most recently, we have started exporting wheat. Our potential for agricultural and mining is beyond your imagination. This is a very wealthy nation when it comes to resources, and it's not just Ethiopia. Most of African countries are wealthy when it comes to resources, and all the European powers want is to use cheap resources. Take West Africa, for instance. They are number one oil exporters in Africa, like the Nigeria and Ghana. They export uh, cocoa beans. They want to buy those resources cheap. So they can only get these resources for low values if there is disability in Africa, and that's obvious. And the problem is the people know this, but the leadership in Africa, most of the leadership, like TPLF in the past, were directly influenced by the West, and they are their puppets, and they do everything they are told. I mean, TPLF has been working against the interests of Ethiopia. We've sent our soldiers to fight in Somalia. We invaded Somalia. We invaded Eritrea. That was
Mhm.
under TPLF. And that has nothing to do with the interest of Ethiopia. And it doesn't benefit the Ethiopian people.
I've wondered also, speaking of how these different things have affected Ethiopia, I made the comment sometime back or whatever that these these outside influences, the reason why some of these leaders, why there's even corruption in some of these different countries, whether we're talking about Tigray, Djibouti, Ethiopia, or going outside to Nigeria and just random parts throughout, or even into South Africa and West Africa. Some of the a big portion of the problem of the corruption anyway of the people in charge or leaders is because outside influences will either delegitimize the elections and say that this person, they didn't properly get in there and they don't represent the will of the people, and
Absolutely.
or they will try to say that this leader is a criminal in some kind of way, or they will just outright try to run a coup, put the leader out of power, or assassinations.
And they have terrorist rebel groups. These kind of situations are happening in Mali. The people of Mali are rebelling, are against the UN, especially the UN and the aid organizations in Africa. Their priority is to support rebel groups and fuel civil wars all over Africa. You can see the same situation in Democratic Republic of Congo. It's one of the wealthiest nations in Africa in terms of resources. And to get those resources, the UN is there and they are helping rebel groups and creating war in that country. And it's similar wherever there is a resource in Africa, there is a UN and there is the rebels when they started war.
Mhm. Um, we've talked about the UN being involved. We talked about uh, the EU. We talked about Western powers. There's one other factor, or I guess wrinkle that I'll throw in there. Oh, hold on one second, and throw a shout out to everybody out there in the chat. Thank you, Chris, Dingo, Baba, and Wesley. Glad to see you all in here. And if you can, make sure to tweet this out. And if you have any questions, please make sure to throw the questions in there. And then I'll toss the questions over to my guest and see if he can kind of answer some of these questions for you all. What I was going to say is I see Isaac Peppers. Hello. Also, hopefully I'm saying your name correctly, Peppers. And if you all have any questions, and anybody who's new to this channel, ever welcome, and I'm glad you're here. Make sure, please, ask any questions. I try to keep this, I call it a conversation more than an interview because I like for it to kind of go back and forth. And if my guest has questions for me, vice versa. But kind of free flowing. So back to what I was saying. We hadn't really talked about one other, I feel like, elephant in the room. How does Israel play into this process? Do you see them as um, part of EU or the Western powers in a whole, or are they kind of representing something a little bit different? Oh, sorry, you still there? Yonatan, did you hear me? Guess we're having a little bit of audio difficulty. Yeah, I guess I had a problem. I guess he'll probably hop back in here. But I welcome everybody who is in here, whether you are on YouTube or on Rockfin. I was curious. I wanted to ask him more in particular, and I see Hamza is in Israel in sports is recognized as Europe. Well, I get that they're recognized as Europe as far as sports, but I do know that they have been trying to I guess, be more included into the African region. And I know that what is it? I think they got observer status as far as part of the African Union. So I just wanted to kind of get some clarification on that. I've kind of heard a little bit of it from a little bit of Google Letu's perspective on it. He in his mind, he says that they do have quite a bit of a influence, so, which will never happen. I mean, I don't think it will, but we'll see. Oh, sound check.
Okay.
All righty, cool. Did you hear my?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, I was wondering one of your thoughts. How does Israel play into like some of the dynamics that are going on there? Because I know that they're not very far away, so I'm just curious.
Uh, I don't know about Israel that much. Their influence here is it's not visible. They don't interfere with the situation here in East Africa. I haven't seen any news or any reports regarding the interference with Israel. We do have a population here. We call them Beta Israel. They are they have Israel origin. However, the political situation here with Israel, we don't have any connection with Israel.
So outside of the trying to remember, what is it, the Philosophians, outside of the Philosopher
Yeah.
Jews, there's not much to do with Israel. Because I was just wondering, because I know I was just talking to a friend here, Hamza, how they are often they're always trying to get into the African Union, and it's like observer status. But I do know that there's issues that they have with certain African nations or so-called Middle East. Because when I think Middle East, I honestly, if you look at the tectonic plates, a lot of a lot of the so-called half of the Middle East or Levant would technically be North Africa. So, I mean, I often wonder how much influence that has within anything. But I mean, I get it. They're not always involved in every single thing, but there is also Mossad where they're operating in ways, and it might not be as clear or specific. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
I don't know. It's not clear, but I can assume that because Egypt is involved with Ethiopia, for instance, that the Mossad or Israel, they could be involved in the situation, but it's not visible, and I don't have any information regarding Israel's influence in, especially in East Africa.
Okay. Oh, let's read this comment here. I'll put it on the screen. Emma says no to Zionism. What are their thoughts on African presence, and are they expanding or retreating today? What about the French and Italian presence there? So, what are your thoughts, sir?
The French, where they have, you see, Djibouti is almost a partial colony for the French. It's a French-speaking nation, and they do have a military base in Djibouti. They are directly involved in the political and military uh, issues of Djibouti. They are kind of a protectorate for the country. They are still acting like that, like it's part of France, and the Italians. Well, the Italians doesn't involve in any part of the East African nations. It's for example, Ethiopia was a colony of Italy, but their relationship is not good, and they don't really have any political or economic or any kind of relation with Eritrea. So, however, the French have direct influence and connection in Djibouti. It's almost the country is indirectly run by France.
Well, I think that's something that in the West is not often picked up on. I mean, I spent some time living in Italy, and Italy has some connections, which I can kind of go into some of my thoughts on that. But since they've had so many internal problems, they've kind of had to focus more at home than anything else. But France is a little bit different story. I know that France does still act, you know, more like a colonial power and tries to really push their influence around in other parts of Africa, to be for sure, and even still try to have influence over Haiti and certain parts of the Caribbean also. So I do know that side of it. But yeah, what I noticed in Italy, and this part, it kind of saddened me to see. Um, a big part of the prostitution which went on in Italy was African immigrants, and just like some of the policies that went on there. Um, some of these immigrants, they come in, they're trying to work, get visa, of course, to try to work in that country, or for Italy, it's called a codas fiscale. Um, and they're trying to get their Italian citizenship, and it's honestly not super hard to get it, but because in Sicily the mob still had more influence than people realize or will admit, um, and not only the mob, all kind of other secret organizations, which you can still look into some of the Masonic organizations, which like put it right out on blast that they're involved in stuff, and why some of the pipeline, I mean not pipelines, but some of the bridges going back and forth from mainland to Italy to don't factor in. So that's going off into a whole nother subject. But what I wanted to mention was, while I was there, and I was in Italy for about 2 years, I noticed that a lot of the murders that happened were African migrants. And so that was something that I just wanted to throw in. And oftentimes they would be coming from North Africa um, to the Horn region. Well, basically the whole entire North Africa, from Northwest Africa to Northeast Africa, the whole way. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on some of that?
Regarding Italy, Italy have tried to invade Ethiopia twice, and believe it or not, they still have economic ties with Ethiopia. You see, in Ethiopia, modern day buildings and roads are being constructed by Chinese constructors. However, Ethiopia have built more than 20 dams on its rivers. We have many rivers here in Ethiopia, and all those dams and hydroelectric power dams are being built by Italian companies, and they are very expensive for Ethiopia. I
Mm-hmm.
still can't understand, including the big dam we are building on Nile. It's being built by Salini, an Italian company, and I don't know why. We have a plan, for instance, to build another 100 dams in Ethiopia, and I have no doubt that they are all going to be built by Italian companies. And I don't know, maybe they have a secret agreement with Italians. But the way I see it is that it would be cheaper if we could get Chinese corporation, or we have a lot of construction companies here in Ethiopia, local companies, and they are not getting the the opportunity to build our dams. And I don't see why, or I don't know. It's a secret, I think,
Hmm.
how they get this mega. This is a mega project. The Nile Dam is the second largest dam in Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and it's being built by the Italians. We do have construction companies in Ethiopia, but they are not getting these contracts.
Hmm. Because one thing I do know normally about Italian politics is if they do have some kind of an influence, you might not see what they're doing necessarily on the surface all the time, but there is often some stuff going on, and I think that with the new president, I think it's called a president. I'm blanking, but was it Maloney? I think things are going to be a little bit different. Hamza says the mafia in southern Italy is still powerful because the CIA is funding them in order um, to the south to the poor, south poor and prosper. Not prosper. In order, to, yeah, I definitely agree. Yes, this is something that I was going to ask. Actually, Emma asked. Or it says Emma, aka Volvo. What are the thoughts? What are your thoughts on the Chinese in Ethiopia, and how is the relationship and cooperation? Because I've wondered that. I hear some sides that say um, that they would rather deal with the Chinese um, than than the Western powers. Some say they
No,
would rather deal with the Western powers than Chinese. I do know, of course, that the African nations would prefer to be able to do most of the stuff more on their own, if they can. But I mean, when you're forced, when your hand is forced, you know, how do you feel about, I guess first to Emma's question, the Chinese influence there, and then I guess expand on the verses. What difference are you noticing between the two?
the Chinese, well, the Western accuse the Chinese of stealing and exploiting African resources.
Mm-hmm.
The way I see it is that, yeah, they do. Of course, we're not getting what we should for the resources that we are putting into the Chinese market, and the trade between China and Africa. But you see, the problem is the same with the West as well. The difference is they both exploit Africa. The West are cruel about it. They fund rebels, they destabilize Africa. At least Chinese, they're not doing that. They're giving aid. They don't involve with aid. They give loans. So African countries are actually developing with that loan. For example, if you take Ethiopia, we build a lot of roads, a lot of schools, and infrastructure using the Chinese loan,
Mm-hmm.
and no interference, no political interference from the Chinese. I really appreciate that, and that is what Africa needs. Okay, if we are going to be exploited, at least we need our peace. You know,
Well, yeah, I mean,
and
yeah, I had heard that, and because that's something that I wanted to ask about, in particular, because that's one thing I hear sometimes from people in the West, like they look at it as if it's equal, like China is doing just as bad, and when I talk to people within Africa, whether it's north, south, east, central. I keep hearing that yes, China is bad, but China is not forcing necessarily forcing their will. And like my friend Dr. Guguletu, he says that it's on Africa to start making better deals and not keep getting taken to the cleaner by China. It's not on China to make better deals for Africa. And I was wondering, one, your thoughts on that, and then for two, I've also heard, though China might not be getting involved in the government, I've heard something about like them setting up some kind of police forces or something in the nations which they go into Africa. What are your thoughts on those two things?
I haven't seen any police. The problem that we have with the Chinese is that they bring their own labor force to Africa. For example, here in Ethiopia, there are thousands of Chinese workers here in Africa, here in Ethiopia, and I don't see the need for that. We do have educated labor. We do have uh, laborers working here, and we have enough human power here to carry out those projects. They give you the loan, and they do the projects themselves. They don't hire Ethiopians. Only lower level labor force they hire, and management and the supervisors, they are all Chinese. That's a bad thing, because
Mhm.
after all, it's a loan money. We have to pay it. So in a way, it's our money, and they are not only benefiting by doing the projects, but they are also benefiting uh, by employing their citizens rather than our citizens. That is something to critic about the Chinese involvement in Africa.
Because yeah, I mean, I don't think that it could be. I don't think that you're going to get any necessarily loan or partnership from any nation, which is going to that every nation is going to try to do what they feel is more in the best interest, or get the best deal that they can get out of somebody. And if you have political, I mean not political, but if you have some kind of leverage in the situation, a lot of times that's taking. I guess I should clarify because Emma says I think we only talk about China. I feel that the other end working with China is a lot of neo-colonial nations set up by the West, which we never talk about. And I guess I'll give you that one first, and then I'll ask the next one. What do you think? Do you feel like the ones who are working with China are a lot of them are neo-colonial nations that are set up by the West?
Mm, I don't know, but mostly what I see is that in Ethiopia and in East Africa, uh, some of the countries that has been established by the colonial power tend to focus on outside forces and outside influences. However, this trend is changing, especially in Ethiopia. We are having our own local economy, and we are trying to do our best to change the situation. And yeah, it's true for most African nations that have been set up by colonial nations to be easily influenced by Western powers or China.
Yeah, I guess Emma also said I haven't heard anything about police force as well. I think they expect nations to negotiate. If not, they will do it for themselves. Well, I guess what I was talking about the police force thing, and I wonder if I could try to see if I can find it real quick. It wasn't like police forces to police any of the African nations which they went into. It's like some kind of police force that comes along with their businesses that kind of monitors things on that grounds which they're working on. I could be wrong, but let me see. Let's see what I can find. Because you said you haven't heard of it either, right? the police forces and. Or maybe that might not be something that's going on throughout the whole entire of the nation.
Yes. Well, in Ethiopia, we don't have these kind of situations, but I can imagine that in some countries where there is a security problem, they may have their own security personnel there.
Okay, here, let me put this on the screen. I got a couple of different, let's see. I got a couple of different, we'll see what we got here. A couple of videos I can share. Let's see, let's play this one.
For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a...
Don't know why I am getting ads. What the heck? Oh, that's why I'm on the wrong one.
The presidential age limit after the speaker adjourned the session following a thorough investigation into the matter. Uganda's parliamentary speaker, Rebecca Kadaga, was forced to adjourn the debate about a controversial bill aimed at scrapping presidential age limits after opposition MP Lucy Akelo raised concern that there were soldiers in the parliamentary chapel. Some of the MPs say they found plastic bottles with urine in them, which the soldiers were apparently using as toilets. They also said they found useful utensils and leftover food. This is not the first time this is happening. In September, fighting first broke out in Uganda's parliament.
Yeah, sorry about that. That's not what I was looking for. That's not the subject. Or was it Chinese police? Chinese police team up to fight crime. Let's see if this one fits. No, but I mean, I guess what you can see here by just some of the searches, Chinese opens illegal police stations across the globe, triggers concern. Oh yeah, I'll play this one and see. Dramatic music. Oh, Emma says that's a terrible news source. Yeah, that's why I need you all to help me out and give me better sources. When it comes to some of the news over here, that's why I try to speak to as many journalists as I can. But we can stop that. But that's what the gist of what I was talking about. I've been just hearing about them setting up small little police forces. And so maybe that might not be something that's going on in Ethiopia.
We don't have any police forces here in Ethiopia. However, in Djibouti, they do have a military base, a Chinese military base in Djibouti.
Okay.
However, they don't bring their own police force to Ethiopia. That's unheard of.
Oh, okay, cool. So that's good. That's something that you guys are not having to deal with. Hamza says, but for long term, it's troubling because them in the future, it will be easy for them to spy on, dethrone the government they don't like. I honestly think that anytime you invite another country into your country, that is what is happening. Would you agree or disagree?
The trend, it's highly unlikely because I haven't seen or heard of any Chinese involvement in elections or political situations in Africa. They simply come here to do business and make profit. However, with profit, it's highly associated with government policies. And I do suspect that in the future they may try and influence political parties in Africa as well. So it's up to us to limit that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I kind of always say, it is up for the people within the nation to kind of monitor those things. At the same time, you can't just assume that it's going to necessarily be bad because if you look at it, China, they went through tons of colonialism through Western powers and by proxy Japan. And through that, they found a way to not let that completely keep them under wraps, and they were able to build up their own nation and wealth and economy and things like that to kind of, I feel like now, separate themselves as their own as a superpower in their own right, regardless of the fact that they were going through colonization. And I don't see why African nations could not do the same as what China did and follow that same roadmap and use the deals and whichever that they're working out with these African nations, and then at the same time be able to rise as a superpower in their own right. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, China. That's what they promised. For instance, Ethiopia, that they are working on infrastructure and industries. And if you see the trend and what it did to our country, it really helped us. For example, for this Western countries, they give us food, all right, aid. It's like every year we are dependent on them. But the Chinese aid is different. It's not aid. They don't give you money, but they build industries here. We have several industry parks in Ethiopia established by the Chinese, and they are also helping us with our agriculture. For example, for this year, for the first time in Ethiopian history, we are exporting wheat. That's a major transition for our country, and that is only possible because of China, and we are really grateful for that. Ethiopia is known for hunger and drought, and
True.
that history is changing. You see, we are exporting to Kenya wheat this year, and that's a major step for us. So the Chinese, they say they promised us that they are only working with Ethiopia to make the country better and to make us self-sustained. For instance, with the industry parks, you can see that we are producing our own products. We have the resources. So the Chinese, they build industry parks here. They are mostly owned by Ethiopians, and we are producing our own things. And that is highly improving our economy. Within the next 5 to 10 years, we will be self-sufficient, and we will no longer need the help from China or Europe. And
Well,
that's a good thing for Africans.
definitely. Throw a shout out to Lucy over there at Blue Moon Red Wine. Good to see you in here, friend. She says, love the topic variety. Well, thank you. I give it credit all to my guest and in the chat and on the show here. I was let's see. Emma also said you need size and scale. One united socialist Africa because China didn't develop as provinces but as a nation. I completely agree, and that's something that I wanted to ask this question because since it doesn't look like China at this point, I'll say at this point, is trying to interfere into the governmental affairs of Africa. And it seems like they're just trying to work out business deals. Whether we agree with the business deals or think it's something nefarious down the road, that's not the question at this point. The fact that they're doing these partnerships, it is allowing for Africa to actually start exports and create GDP growth and start to see sustainable development. And through that sustainable development, without having to have, the threats necessarily, or I'll say, well, there's always still the threats, but the limiting of the threats of coup attempts and assassination from Western powers. How much do you feel like that can really lead to a, I guess more power within the African Union.
Yes, the African Union is not really as united as the EU, but we are having a strong relationship in East Africa, especially in East African nations, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and Somalia. With Kenya, we are forming strong partnership, and there are initiatives that are projects to link these countries with roads and economic structures, and this is highly facilitated by China. However, the West does not like this kind of situation, especially, I mean, they directly influence the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Eritrea was part of Ethiopia. After Eritrea seceded and became a nation, we've been in war with Eritrea for 30 years. And now comes a new leadership in Ethiopia, and now once again we are united. We have families in Eritrea. They are coming here. We are going there. We are starting economic relationship, partnership. The border is open. You don't even need a passport to go to Eritrea. And this kind of situation is freaking out the West. They do not want to see East Africa united. And if you see the people, we love each other so much. You see, we have Ethiopian, like Somalia, for instance. There is a Somali region in Ethiopia who speak Somali language, who are Muslims. Eritrea, you have Tigray region who speaks Tigray, the same language, the same region, the same society. You have the same with South Sudan, with Djibouti, with Sudan. Okay, you have these people who live in Ethiopia and who also live in the bordering nations. But the society, if you look at the social media trends, the people are uniting, and it's the same with the governments as well. They want unity, and it's the only way that we can prosper. And this is not welcomed by the West. And I think that's why they are trying to destabilize these countries. They are working so hard to destabilize the region, and it's very sad because for once in our history, the people of East Africa, they are coming together, they are united as a society, they are forming unities, and they are uh, opening up to each other at the country level as a politics and economic structures. And the West, they're not having this, and but somehow we have to survive, and it's our only strength is our unity. We have social unity, and we will overcome this challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think honestly that led to probably the death of Gaddafi also, because they wanted to stop these unions, which they saw starting to form up. Whether it was formations in North Africa, which were forming up together, and then they were seeing, what was going on in the Horn of Africa, how these nations who always had a similar customs and traditions and have been kind of divided. We're kind of coming back together. And I think they saw, well, if North Africa starts coming together and West Africa starts coming together and East Africa starts coming together and South Africa comes together and Central Africa comes together, then all of these different factions can come together for a one united Africa, which could actually be a dangerous and scary thing for NATO, since they've spent so long exploiting all of these nations. And I often say it's kind of like if you attacked and bullied somebody and you fear them getting power over you because you're worried that all the stuff that you did to them, they're going to do back to you in turn. Emma says West is trying to create ethno-nationalist states, which is what created a lot of conflicts in history. What do you say, sir?
That's absolutely the case, and that's why they want TPLF back in power. For example, in Ethiopia, because the TPLF party, they have been using this ethnocentric political structure in Ethiopia, and they have divided the nation into 84 tribal parties. Can you believe it? Like 84, and each wants a session, and they were fighting among each other. Like the Amaras were fighting with the Tigris, the Somali, with the Oromo, and every part of the country there was trouble. And they were prospering with this. They want this. They want this to continue. However, with the new government, the whole thing changes, and that all you hear in the radio, in the streets, is talk of unity, and the country is finally unified, and they do not like this, and they want the TPLF back because they want to start to continue the ethnocentric politics that was dividing the nation. And no matter how prosperous Ethiopia gets, if there is no unity, it's for nothing. It will all be ruined overnight. We have seen these situations in the past that all the structure, all the investment that has been built in the Oromia region was destroyed almost overnight. And so the unity and the economic growth can only be sustained if there is a unity among the people. And ethnocentric politics is danger for Africa. It is what has been lagging Africa behind.
Yeah, I mean, I look at right now. I don't know. Give me your opinion, but I feel like the Western powers right now are kind of facing a, let's see, I guess a crossroads where the hegemony that they've been able to enjoy, I feel, is truly being questioned. And we often look at Russia, China, but I think Africa is not often thought about because that it could at some point really unite quickly and actually be like a real economic threat to the West. What's your thoughts?
That is absolutely true. Because we do have all the natural resources. It's a wealthy continent. The only thing that's lacking is stability, because the economic growth can be achieved very, very fast because we do have all the natural resources and the human power to do it. So what they are depriving of Africa is our unity and our peace. And they've done that through ethnic politics. And I think the African nations are coming to the realization that ethnic politics have to go, or Africa cannot exist as a continent. It has become a matter of survival. And I'm sure that within the next few years, that Africa will definitely rid itself of the ethnic politics burden that the West have imposed upon us.
Let's see. Hamza says the problem for African unity is Nigeria. Bashir is a Saudi puppet. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's one region where I haven't really done a lot of digging yet into Nigeria. I've done some. I talked to people in South Africa. I talked to people in North Africa. I've paid attention loosely to some of the stuff going on in East Africa and in West Africa, but I don't know a lot about Nigeria and like what's going on like currently in the Congo region and some of those things. So what's some of your thoughts? Are you knowledgeable in those areas also?
I do have social media friends from Nigeria. We do have good connection with the Nigerians. Nigeria is one of the fastest growing nations in Africa. And if you look at, it's the same situation that the Nigerians are facing. They do have terror problem, and that terror problem doesn't emanate from the society of the Nigeria. The Boko Haram, it is being sponsored by the Arab nations.
Oh, that's in Nigeria. Okay, all right, gotcha.
So you see, everywhere you go in Africa, you do have a terrorist group, a rebel group that is supported by foreign actors. It's the same everywhere you go. So I know that most governments are puppets for other countries. So I don't know exactly whether it's being a puppet of Saudi Arabia or Europe, but I do know that Western influence in Africa is
from my knowledge,
is a problem.
Is directly a puppet of Saudi Arabia. Hamza's entirely correct there, because one thing you can see is like how some of the banking works. The money will come out of Saudi to somebody, say some kind of wealthy Saudis who live, say, New York or Philly or something like that, and then it's shipped from Saudi, shipped to the U.S., then shipped, to different organizations, or it might even go into Europe, but it takes a couple of leaps. But the one thing that we've seen is it's came from Saudi into the West, and then into some of these groups in Africa.
Yeah, corruption is a major issue in Nigeria. And it could be, I don't know exactly whether the leaders are influenced by Saudi, but what I know is that they do have similar problem with us, that is terrorists and corruption and foreign interference in their politics, both from the Arab countries and the Western. The Western countries are blaming the government. They are sanctioning the Nigerian government. They are putting pressure on the Nigerian government, and you can see the same situation all over Africa.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've noticed. It's this same kind of dynamic where you have Western powers, whether it might be in this region, it is the Italians who might have a little influence. In this region, you go, and it's the British who have influence. In this region over here, it's the French who have influence, and it just bounces around from different Western powers. Of a couple of them, it's the Dutch who still have some influence, and it all just depends on which African nation or territory which you're referring to which European power on this side. And then on the other side, it's either influence, it looks like, from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and Iran.
Yeah, it's like a scramble for Africa all over again. Added China and the Arab nations as well. It's difficult.
I got another question from Emma. She says, so going back to Ethiopia, what is the current situation with the TPLF, or has it been talked about? No, we haven't talked about the TPLF. What are your thoughts, sir?
The TPLF is being supported by the United Nations aid organizations. That's where they get their supplies, their fuel, they have training camps in the UNHCR refugee camp. They are being sheltered by foreign aid organizations. And the WHO, for instance, head of WHO, Dr. Tedros, is their leader, is among the leader of TPLF, and he's using the platform of WHO to influence Ethiopian government. However, the situation on the ground is changing, and it will soon be resolved, I'm sure, one way or the other. There is a peace conference to be held in South Africa. I don't know where that is going as well. The Ethiopian government is 100% committed to the negotiation. We still haven't heard from the TPLF group. I hope that works and there is a peaceful situation, peaceful resolution to the conflict. That's what all people want. However, if the war continues, I'm sure it will be concluded within a few months.
Well, and now that Emma brought that up, it brings me to a question. What do you think of Dr. Tedros just in general? Because, I mean, looking back to his history now, and my apologies to everybody out there for this kind of slipping my mind until now to even talk about this. But what are your thoughts on him? Because especially I look back through his history, the stuff which I've read, and it is, to be kind, it is very shaky and very sketchy, a lot of stuff which I see in his background. So just wondering, am I just looking at him through a unfair lens, or just what are your thoughts on Dr. Tedros?
You can see that he's clearly not a very good leader because we have faced a pandemic with COVID, and there's also now another pandemic with monkeypox. And he's not doing a good job as a leader of the World Health Organization. He has faced a lot of critics for his handling of COVID. Uh, when it comes to his connection with TPLF, he is part of the leadership of the terrorist group. And I don't know what kind of
Hmm.
planet we live in. World Health Organization head is a member of a terrorist group. Can you imagine that?
Well,
And he's using
he is directly
and
to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so I don't know how you feel about them, but that's the person who's kind of propped him all the way up to these,
Mhm.
to where he is now.
And he's using the platform of the World Health Organization to support TPLF. He's tweeting every day about the issues that are related with TPLF. He's supposed to handle the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
not support his terrorist group, and nobody says nothing about this. Not the UN, not the US or Europe. He has free reign over World Health Organization's outlets, and this is disturbing.
Oh, thank you for correcting me, reminding me, and the Clinton Foundation as well. I mean, and so I look at what he's done throughout, throughout Africa and throughout India also. I mean, in my opinion, has been nothing short of criminal. Oh, I think we just lost Yonatan again. Can we talk about the BS climate change not working in Africa? I guess we get him back on. I can ask him that, and we can leave that as a good question, a kind of a good ending point. I definitely would like to have him back on. I plan on having I know that Dr. Google Etu, he's had some problems with with Twitter. We all know what that's like. I've definitely had my issues getting in trouble with Twitter, and so he's just had to sort some of that stuff out. And then we are working on having him back next week. That is the plan. Let's see, But in India, many people like Bill Gates, unfortunately. Well, I believe that's because the media just the media in general, what I see coming out of India, it does report some things pretty good, but I see it as very, very neoliberal. And so you can see the neoliberal influence, whether that's, direct Clinton Foundation or what the DCCC, you can definitely see their hand on the media there. If not like some kind of direct corruption, you can definitely see that they share a similar ideology, at least to, the DCCC and, the the neoliberal democratic side. Emma says climate change not working in Africa, like all the droughts and everything. Well, I mean, it's from my opinion, I'm seeing that everywhere is dealing with all of these issues, and all the storms and everything are getting bigger. Some people in our spheres, they like to put that mostly on geoengineering. Do I believe that's a possibility and contributes? Yes, I do. But I look at just if you're if the militaries are constantly fighting wars and the pollution that comes with those, it's inevitable to have, climate issues, and the fact that nobody's trying to work towards any kind of solutions, whether that's greener technology or some kind of way to just extract the carbon out of the air. I'm trying to remember. I'll have to dig it out somewhere, but I read some really good articles after an interview I saw where a gentleman was talking about a way to use what was it, hemp, the way you can use hemp and you can start making more things out of hemp. And hemp not only is like zero carbon neutral, it actually extracts negative carbon out of the air itself. And it literally, you don't even have to switch the whole entire society. Just build a couple of buildings here and there that are out of it. That could help. Trees, start planting more trees instead of cutting them all down. And honestly, think what Bolsonaro, what he did in Brazil, does not help either with him chopping down a lot of the rainforest. So, I mean, I think that it's a global effort in making things worse, whether intentional or unintentional. I believe personally that this is something that is outside of man-made hands that's creating and driving these things, and we are just reaching towards a certain precipice. And I'll leave it there. See, did Taylor answer? Let's see, 100 and the ocean as fixed photoplankton is producing most of our oxygen. There's so, I mean, Emma, I agree. There are so many different ways where we could be, you know, using other ways and fixing the solution. And for those who say that these kind of things are not reversible, that is an absolute lie. In the horrible tragedy which we noticed in genocide here stateside, which a lot of people, I don't think that some people don't realize this. When you had the massive genocide of Native Americans, it's horrible and tragic. And I mean, I would still I would trade the opposite. I would trade those people being back. And because some of them are literally my ancestors, I would trade that. I mean, I definitely don't want the genocide, but as far as if you were looking at how it affected the planet as a whole, because of you had a massive drop in population quickly. If you look at the CO2s in that area, and then you had a massive amount of trees that grew, proving that if you plant a lot of trees, it can help extract more carbon out of the air and reverse some of the cycles. I mean, that's one thing which I see, which they do in China, where they're literally building trees on top of buildings. That way it can help pull some of that out. But as long as we still, and I say we as nations, continue to, you know, pollute the environment, there's no way to stop what's happening. Because I mean, all this stuff is controllable. It is, if you're responsible with it. Hamza says, plus they control the climate globalists. The Florida hurricane was man-made. I don't know. You have to show me something to, I mean, man-made as in we have basically destroyed our own environment and caused for stronger storms. I definitely agree. Just like, for instance, something that's not talked about very often. I talked about it with somebody as far as into Canada. Canada, you're starting to see more people, well, and you're seeing it in California also, but in Canada in particular, because it's not getting as cold as it normally would, it's not triggering that instinct in bears for them to hibernate. And so you're having more bear attacks. You're having more bears walking into stores and all kind of stuff like that, because they're not hibernating like they normally would at those specific times. And you're seeing the drop of insects and bees and things like that. And so all of these things are happening, and it's a ripple effect that's going on, or the butterfly effect, literally, that's going on that is affecting all these things. Now, do I believe it's just man came up with these ideas all of a sudden how they were going to start destroying everything? Not necessarily. Uh, but I do believe that the spirit is put on these people to just do certain things and for it to fulfill a prophetic ending. See, if we can make a hurricane, we have solved the energy problem of humanity. Yeah, because then you could just put hurricanes in drought areas and then end the drought with all the water. Yeah, I don't believe like one thing that I saw in the military, um, and with the high level stuff that we had in our possession, the one thing that I saw is that no matter how smart these supposed scientists and people are, there's still massive problems. And a lot of their stuff malfunctions. And so for me to believe that they can geoengineering control directly, like say, we're going to make a hurricane happen right here and it's going to be this strong. I don't believe that they have, I don't believe that they have that ability. If they did have that ability, I think that they would be probably using it to attack other nations directly instead of it attacking the U.S. So that's my thoughts there. Like what we did in China for the Olympics 2008, they stopped the rain. I don't know. I'll have to look into that and see. Yipper says, I leave a like and watch later. Thank you, Yipper. Hopefully you enjoy it. I'm glad to see you. So it's one thing to see rain, but whole other process to make a hurricane. Yeah, a hurricane is far more complex, and to be able to sustain a hurricane, literally coming out of the middle of the Atlantic or out off the coast of West Africa, and then go all the way across the Atlantic into the Caribbean, and go through the Caribbean up into that's. I don't believe we have that kind of technology. And if we did, I don't believe it's that reliable to be able to control it like that. The cloud seeding is also not really deterministic. Solutions, of course, but they could help because Satan's job is not to help us. Yeah, I agree. Satan's job is not to help us. But that's what when I believe that they're doing this stuff, I don't believe that they. I believe everything is still more practical, and I don't know, Emma, if you're familiar with Hamza, we do have these like theological little debates. I do believe that this is being engineered by we say what forces and principalities, but I don't believe like they were literally just giving a weather machine. I believe that through their actions cause XYZ. It's kind of like if a person decides to not get enough sleep and they go on a drive and they happen to start getting sleepy behind the wheel, then they get into a car accident, and that car accident kills the scientist, and then that results in a drop in technology. Yes, I believe it happens like that, but not a direct boom. I got a machine. Boom, we do this, and it's all that simple. I don't believe that the Father works that way. I mean, the solution is to end capitalism. Nothing is going to happen until then. We can't keep waiting for them to help with anything. Well, I think what they're going to do is they're going to. It's kind of one of the old 90s kind of phrase, check yourself before you wreck yourself. I think because these people are so unchecked, they're going to lead to their own downfall and destruction. It's kind of like setting a trap. Sorry. Yeah, I want to let that fire engine go by, but yeah, you can set a trap and that trap end up harming you itself. I guess we waited for a little bit, and Yonatan is not able to get back in. So I guess I can kind of a good point to leave it at about an hour and a half. Emma says, I need to run now. I will leave a like. Peace. Thank you so much. And thank you for everybody who watched, whether you are on the Rockfin side, the YouTube side, watching through Periscope, or whichever other ways that I might have put out there that I don't remember. But that said, this has been what I've been thinking with Marcus Cage. Hopefully y'all have a great weekend, and I will see you all later. Thank you. Have a good one.